Let's take a look at some charts and information on ZRX for Brave New Coin. So ZRX is a DEX aggregator. They sort of sit on top of everything and function as a liquidity aggregator, as they state here, for all the DEXs, for DeFi. They have a specific website now where all this stuff looks the cleanest, and that's Matcha. So you can access ZRX through API, through any of the various DeFi mechanisms, but ultimately Matcha has been, for them, something that's been created and done really well if you were looking for a DEX or trading on a DEX or using the DEX experience where you connect your hardware or software wallet and away you go. If you look just for ETH, and you can see how easy it is for crypto native, non-crypto native. It's got that thick font, easily maneuverable stuff that I like to see. None of this like 5-point stuff. Just in your face, bold everything. I want to swap DAI for ETH. I can do it here. And it tells you the slippage, how you want to connect. It tells you everything you want to know if you're a trader's trader. It tells you things that you may not care about if you're not a trader. But this is the kind of thing you want to see if you want to see DEXs increase in popularity. We need to simplify the experience, and that's what Matcha does. Not to sound like an ad for Matcha, but what they do really well, and they also have limit orders, I believe, on some pairs, but not all pairs. Here it says limit orders on wrapped Ethereum. So that is also a unique feature for a DEX, for the DEX experience. They've also migrated or begun to migrate to multiple networks, which as an aggregator, that's exactly what you need to be doing. If you're an aggregator, you don't care which network you're using. Ideally, you're connected to everything. As a user, you certainly don't care if I'm trying to trade anything in between anything else. This acts as like an atomic swap-esque intermediary. But ultimately, if I'm trading this stuff, I just want to look for best price. I don't care what it's sitting on necessarily. So this is a very smart move from them and any other DEX aggregators like 1inch. I wouldn't expect something like Uniswap to ever go off Ethereum onto anything else. They will make Ethereum work till their dying day. They will make layer 1, layer 2 stuff work until their dying day because they are Ethereum through and through. That's their identity. For this aggregator stuff, that's certainly less of the case and just makes more sense to be everywhere or anywhere they can be. They also announced a DAO to sort of decentralize the treasury, decentralize the holdings. There's going to be an effort on all of these ICO projects to continue to prove some sort of increase in decentralization, because at that point, the low-hanging fruit will be the targets or marks for regulatory enforcement actions, that sort of thing. That doesn't mean, that isn't to say that ZRX can't get hit with some sort of enforcement action. It's just, it's going to be harder to be convincing that that's the case. And this is tied to their end goal of decentralizing everything. And we're seeing this all over the place with Binance and Coinbase just saying we don't have an office anymore, right? We don't have a physical location. It's certainly on brand with the crypto ethos of just, here's the money, it's safe, let's figure out what we're going to do with it. We don't control it, but we use the smart contract to tell the funds what to do and when and who to pay, that sort of thing. If we look at all the DEX metrics here on DeFi Prime, it's mainly Uniswap and SushiSwap, and it's kind of unfair to even include the DEX aggregators on this because they're just separate and or could be double counting some of this volume. If you look at ZRX Native, ZRX API, and Matcha here, which looks to be maybe 2.5%, it would be comparable with SushiSwap as far as volume is concerned if we're looking at pure DEX to DEX comparisons. So it's hard to know how to read this exactly because how much of this is double counted, how much is ZRX routing through SushiSwap, that sort of thing. But anyway, there's certainly bigger volumes up with everything else, and I think this might even be double counting some of the ZRX stuff through Matcha and API versus native. I'm not 100% sure on that, but just keep that in mind. There's caveats with that data, certainly. All in all, if you're bullish on DEXs, if you're bullish on these tokens, any of these tokens, you want to see volumes continue to remain high, to remain elevated. You want to see everything exciting. You want to see excitement in the market. You don't want to see anything 2020, 2019 related where basically we're just flat here, right? This is new paradigm, frothy type volume, sure, but it's also bullish just for these underlying tokens, because even if someone doesn't want to buy that token, they're certainly looking at all this stuff thinking, okay, what does this do? What does this do? What does ZRX do? What does 1inch do? How is Bancor AMM different than Uniswap? How is Uniswap version 3 different than version 2? You know, this keeps people interested in this sort of stuff, so long as volumes are high. So even if you're bearish on governance tokens, which I generally am, so long as volumes remain high and trading and speculation remains high, I think these tokens have a bright future, at least in the near term. If we look at the ZRX on-chain metrics, transaction counts, and average transaction values, transaction counts have kind of been flat and all over the place. And with something like these governance tokens, you don't necessarily expect transactions to just continue to increase, because ultimately you're sort of just buying these tokens and ideally using them to vote on governance. But if not, they just kind of sit in a exchange wallet and don't necessarily get moved around too often. So it's not surprising to see transaction counts for stuff like this just hold flat over multiple years. This, I believe, was one of these spikes was the Coinbase listing. I want to say it was somewhere in May, but I could be wrong. For some reason, October makes more sense to me. But anyway, you'll see spikes on listings, stuff like that. But ultimately, over time, most of these governance tokens are probably just going to stay flat unless there's some event to move everything otherwise. Even still, since October 2020, this stuff has slightly increased. Not that I'm just looking for bullish things. It's just that's what I can see that's readily available. And if we look at average transaction values, those are kind of up with ZRX sitting at or near all-time highs, and they've pulled back pretty significantly from all-time highs. So this could very well have represented sort of holders cashing in, and now price is just kind of in this range doing a bunch of nothing on the USD pair. If we look at NVT and active addresses, NVT has continued to decline, now sits at near all-time lows. So when I see this picture, I'm certainly more bullish than transaction counts. You have to keep in mind there is staking on ZRX, so that does increase these metrics slightly, but ultimately this measures market cap versus on-chain activity. So how to read this would be price is currently at its lowest point relative to on-chain activity since inception. So it's hard to be bearish on that. Active addresses continue to increase slightly. Now, none of this stuff is lasting. Most of this stuff just spikes with price action. So it's hard to take any of this on-chain governance stuff too seriously. Here's their staking mechanic. It's pretty easy to actually do. I'm not done it myself, but how this works is you put your ZRX behind a market maker, very similar to a validator on any other proof of stake network, and then you get rewarded in ETH based on the fees they collect. So it's actually a pretty good system in that you're not diluting the ZRX holdings or ZRX supply, and you're paying out in an appreciating asset relative to ZRX, right? So you're kind of making out pretty well, I think, if you're able to capture a decent amount of these ETH rewards. Now, they do have some of the best and most competitive fees relative to the other DeFi stuff. So you're not going to get paid out like insanely well. You know, if you're a part of these pools, you want fees to be as high as they can for as long as they can, right? But ultimately, that's really not what Matcha or ZRX is about. So you're not going to see massive returns here, but it's something you can do with your ZRX besides just buying, holding it, using it on voting, waiting for it to appreciate, that sort of thing. Let's switch to technicals. We have the 50 and the 200 EMAs here, RSI, and yearly pivots. I've highlighted a few just key things. One was this mega consolidation period that broke down along with everything else in 2018. Stellar had a very similar triangle that broke down at that time. Then ZRX just did a bunch of nothing for a few years. And finally in January 2021, along with everything else, bouncing on support several times here, the 50 and the 200 cross was favorable as well on the bullish side. And just you saw this repricing explosion across many things. And right now, kind of since January, you know, it's done a bunch of nothing, really. Ultimately, it's just in this range, right? So it doesn't look too compelling relative to some of this other stuff, that this is going to push higher, which is why I think ultimately you have to have conviction that if you think there's going to be rotation from ETH into DeFi, or if you think DeFi is going to have another leg up relative to ETH in the near term, and all this stuff won't collectively collapse when ETH collapses, then I think this stuff is an okay play, because we've basically ranged at all-time highs for the past 3 months, haven't really done much of anything. And it looks on the bullish side of neutral, right? It's above the 50, it's above the 200, it's above the previous all-time high. It's trying to do something. If we just measure this out on fibs, it looks like it wants 250, and there's a yearly pivot there as well. Anything beyond 250 in the near term would probably mean that there's just a bunch of stuff exploding in DeFi, much like it did in January. Maker, another video I'm going to do today, very similar situation where a lot of this stuff kind of just explodes, consolidates for an extended period of time, explodes, consolidates for an extended period of time, just that markup consolidation type stuff. So it still looks bullish to me, even though it doesn't look great. If we look at the daily cloud, the 50 and the 200 look like, or sorry, the TK lines look like they could recross bullish once again. So cloud is green, prices above cloud, holding just above the Kijun. If you're waiting on trade here in a vacuum like you are on BTC, you're waiting for this bullish TK cross with price above cloud. That's your go long signal for sure at that point in time. And even on this time frame, we've seen similar crisscrosses kind of in here as well, where this may not explode, right? But it definitely leans more and more bullish. And you just have to treat every signal like this as having the potential to move in a significant way, because on balance, the crosses that explode pay for the ones that don't, right? ZRX BTC on the 3-day is much more range bound since 2019. You can see it had an explosion in 2018, retraced everything back to those lows. And now trend-wise, it's a bunch of nothing, right? It's below the cloud. It's in this massive VPVR resistance zone. Even if it breaks up, it's got to deal with the VPVR resistance here. It's got to deal with the local high here. It's got to deal with the yearly pivot here. So if this can get past this R1, I like 10K sats. And when that does happen, it may happen quickly, as it typically does with the BTC charts. It's just hard to expect it when price is sitting within this tight range. So your first tip off would be a break above the 3-day cloud. And your second tip off would be a break above this R1. Third tip off above this VPVR. So those are your levels, I think, of confidence in bullish reversal here to 10K, 11K sats based on yearly pivots. That's certainly reasonable as far as upside's concerned. And that would be, what, a 3x basically from here. So not too crazy, I don't think, to think that that move is possible. ZRX BTC on the daily is already, the 5200 has already crossed bullish. RSI doesn't really help you out too much here. But you could argue ascending triangle, but ultimately it needs to get above this resistance, above 4K sats, above 6K sats, above 7K sats. You know, those are the levels I'd set alerts for if I was bullish on this. And ZRX ETH kind of similarly is stuck in this range bound VPVR levels. It really looks like it wants to retest these lows. So I'd be looking for support at those levels against ETH. And if this does bounce, once it bounces, I'd be looking to see a return into this VPVR, just previous consolidation. I mean, you can see the horizontal levels. It's pretty clear here where it finds support, where it finds resistance. The 50 and the 200 on the daily pair is bearish. So overall, I think ZRX is a great product. I think they're doing the right things. They're attempting to become increasingly decentralized, increasingly multi-chain. The UI UX is probably the best you'll see for anybody in crypto as far as trading on a DEX. They have limit orders. They even have staking for the token. The token on-chain stats are mediocre, as are most governance tokens. So it's hard to really read too much into that. Technicals for the USD pair are on the bullish side of neutral and have been range bound since breaking up in January. The BTC pair also looks range bound, and the ETH pair also looks range bound. Lastly, I'll just mention the ETH-BTC fund that I trade for Techemy Capital on Enzyme.finance, non-custodial portfolio management tool, where you can send ETH or USDC if you want to participate. How this works is everything is transparent. You can see allocations, trades, deposits, withdrawals, all that stuff. No mins, no maxes. You can see everything I do and where I do it on the DEX side of things. And we also have a managed DeFi portfolio that has ZRX inside of it as well. Here we can look. It is a 10% allocation currently on the total fund. And the ETH-BTC fund is traded based on technicals and fundamentals, and the DeFi fund is traded loosely on technicals, but mainly on focusing the pillars of DeFi, which are oracles, DEXs, DEX aggregators, lending and borrowing, and then sort of miscellaneous wrapping type stuff. So that's all for this one. Like, dislike, comment, share, subscribe, and happy trading.